Good morning and welcome to Primetime. Primetime at the BU Library is a celebration of the experiences and accomplishments of Bethel faculty, students, and staff. And it's a collaborative project between the Friends of the BU Library, faculty development, and other offices on campus. Most presentations are recorded and can be found in the BU Digital Library. Be sure to check out the library's news and event webpage and the BU calendar for what's coming up on the schedule. Join us on Thursday, November 12th, as we welcome Drs. Karen Drake and Pam Friesen of the Nursing Department, who will present their research on the retrospective comparative study with students at Bethel and Uganda Christian University on perspectives of global health. Today we welcome Dr. Eric Gossett, Professor of Math and Computer Science, as he presents Teaching Math and Computer Science Using Graphic Novels, and shares a sabbatical project of producing a graphic novel to supplement the Discrete Mathematics course. Okay, let's give Eric a hand here.
Okay, well, thank you. What I'm going to talk about is some material related to using graphic novels in classes. First of all, why on earth would I think of doing this? Some of the motivation for using that as a supplement in a class, as well as some of my previous experience in the production process. My current project that's being field tested this semester is a graphic novel to go with the Discrete Mathematics course, and so I want to talk about some of the features of that, some feedback from the students. I did a Qualtrics survey last week. They're about halfway through the material and getting their reactions. Some of my experience in trying to get an artist to work on this. You'll see some of my artwork later on at the end and see why I needed an artist. And then at the end I'll just go through some of the process of how I actually produce the pages and get the text and the pictures and all together. So, why on earth would I use graphic novels in a class? Number one, I think they're fun. Not everyone agrees with that, but it's nice. They provide a fast overview of a topic. The way I'm using it is I recommend to the students that they read the graphic novel section. It's about 6-7 pages in this size, so it's not a lot of reading, but it gives them an overview of the topic, not in as much depth as what the textbook will do, but they walk in knowing, okay, this is what we're going to see. Also, the novels provide a very nice way to do studying for an exam. It gives you a quick way to review in a way that's not just rereading the main textbook. One experience with that, I don't know if I can get back to the beginning here. The Manga Guide to Databases is one of the nice ones. There's a whole series of these books that are published in Japan focusing on math, computer science, biology, physics, chemistry. Very popular, but the Manga Guide to Databases is one of the nicest. It's got probably the most complete story, but one of the students a couple of times ago when I taught the database class, or I guess I wasn't teaching it, but he used that, I recommended it, and he was convinced that by reviewing that the night before exam, he was a letter grade higher than what he normally gets on an exam. So, far. Also, the graphic novel allows me as an author to explore some of the common mistakes that students make. The novel is set up with a tutor and a kid that she's tutoring in this, and the student can make some mistakes and the tutor can then talk about why is that a mistake, and you can't explore that much in a straight up textbook. One of the comments you'll see from the students is I wish you'd have more of that in the text in this novel. It also allows me to model, because the student is a very bright 14-year-old. Parents want something that enhances rather than just accelerates the education. So rather than rushing her through more math, get something that's extra. And as a bright student, she asks questions, and it models for the reader what kind of questions a good student might be asking as they're going through that. Some of what I've done before, a couple of years ago, they were translating, there's a publisher out in California, a little bitty publisher called No Starch Press. That's a little iron in the picture, not an audio. The editor asked me to be the technical reviewer. So they had a translator translating this out of Japanese. They'd send those pages to me, and I would look at it and say, well, this terminology isn't quite the way it's said in America. And so we changed the terminology, changed some of the notation. There's a few places where the editor says, this doesn't, it was somebody who had an engineering background, so he understood linear algebra. This doesn't quite make sense to me. And so I would add a few sentences to clarify it. And it was fun. I had a really fun time doing that. I talked to them and said, you know, I'd really like to do something like this for discrete math. And they said, we don't do original. I think it's probably built into their contract that they translate and they're not going to compete by producing new stuff to compete with the publisher in Japan. Well, that still inspired me to want to do this. And so the last time I had a January off, I started working on the idea, at least exploring a prototype of doing a graphic novel for the discrete math class. Some of the features that I ended up with is, in this case, differs from those other manga guides in that there is two kinds of chapters. There are story chapters and there are content. And the story are linear, and they just say chapter 1, chapter 2, and the content chapters are counting or sets. The reason is that discrete math textbooks don't all present the material in the same order. And this allows the content chapters to be read in whatever order an instructor finds or the student finds will supplement the order that is happening in their textbook, and you still have the story thread going through. You just read a story chapter with every content chapter and you kind of progress through. That was the idea. In the story chapters, we not only learn a little bit about the characters, but there's a number of puzzles that are thrown in just because. So here's, for example, one of them. This is actually something that's about 150 years old as a puzzle. Here lie two grandmothers and their two granddaughters, two husbands with their two wives, two fathers with their two daughters, two mothers with their two sons, two maidens with their two mothers, two sisters with their two brothers, yet but 6 corpses all lie buried here, all born legitimate from incest clear. There really is a solution to this. It's not a trivial solution, but that's explored in some of the story. And then there's some little, just every once in a while, something that just amuses me to kind of do a pun or something off of the main topic. There's a little subtext of the 14-year-old trying to hook up the tutor with her brother, who's also in the university. And so this is Cupid bites the dust. Just little pictures like that in the side or margins. So. There's also a number of study hints in the book, a way to talk about how do you maximize or make your study time available. So I had one little panel in the book talks about working with classmates, or perhaps a few others can be better than working alone if it is done properly. Here's some guidelines. The students should be sharing and discussing ideas, acting like a human copy machine is cheating, not studying. The group should make sure that everyone understands the ideas before moving on. So sample of some things like that, talking about groups. Now, this is a little bit longer interaction. Lily, the student, says, Isolde, do you ever get frustrated or discouraged when you can't solve a problem or you just get stuck? And she says, yes, of course. However, I have recently started thinking differently about failure. I learned a new idea from one of the books assigned in an education course. She's a math secondary licensure student. She digs in her backpack and pulls out, the book is named Make It Stick. Some of you know this book, The Science of Successful Learning. Here's a helpful passage, and then quote something out of the book. People who are helped to understand that effort and learning change the brain and that their intellectual abilities lie to a large degree within their own control are more likely to tackle difficult challenges and persist at them. They view failure as a sign of effort and as a turn in the road rather than as a measure of inability in the end of the road. So the tutor comments, instead of seeing failure as a sign that I am stupid, I see it as an opportunity to learn something new and improve. So I will think about that. Thanks for the help. And now I'm going to go off to the content chapter. Every once in a while there's a longer passage. This is sort of nice idea that came because at the end I start chapters on the right-hand page, and every once in a while at the end of the exercises and review there's a blank page. And that's a waste. So tack on something like, why should I memorize? And give some reasons as in particular I find as I've been here 30-some years, this has become more and more of an issue. Fewer and fewer students see the value in memorizing anything. And I want to give some reasons why it really is in your best interest to do some memorizing. Okay. Here's some reactions from some samples of the Qualtrics I did. I have 44 students who are in the class. 82% of them responded, which I think is pretty high for a survey. Not only that, first question was, have you been doing the reading? This is, I have an assignment on Moodle, and there's no accountability whatsoever. No points attached. I never ask, are you doing the reading? 60+% said, yes, I am doing the reading, which I think that's pretty cool. Okay. Given when I've tried to use those manga guides as supplements, I might have in a class 1 or 2 students actually pay money. I'm giving them the book, so that helps. But to go out and buy an optional book, optional means don't do it. But of the ones who skipped, 2 of them responded. One of them just said, yeah, no points attached. Why should I do this? And another one says, I'm doing some of the reading and used to do it faithfully, but as the year progressed, I've been relying more on the textbook reading and math lab to help me. Now, I need to say, this class has high time demands on the student. I give a lot of homework. And it's set up to where they can't just fake it. Okay? They have to do some reading and turn in some homework before I talk about it and they do some more. So the fact that high a percentage are doing this optional reading in this class either says they're desperate or they're getting something out. Of the ones who are reading both the content and the story, are you reading both content and story chapters? Possibly you just skip the story. 91% are saying, yeah, we're doing both. Of the 2, this is where I had just 2 answers, and of the one of them just typed a bunch of letters, and the other one said, the story's boring. You know, okay, I can do that. You're not going to have a compelling story in something like this and have the ring for content. Right? One in the book is helpful. I don't know whether that's legible in the back, but fiction is easier to read than nonfiction. Framing the content loosely within a narrative makes it easier to read. It is nice to have a second source to review information, since we have learned that reading the same textbook multiple times does not do much for learning. Okay, so these guys are internalizing some of the study hints. That's really great. The graphic novel has helped me to take extra time to commit the material to my memory. Additionally, the storyline provides a separate context that allows me to look at the subject material with a different perspective. Overall, the graphic novel has helped me to grasp the class material. The logical errors and reasoning techniques of the student are just as helpful in learning the material as what Isolde the tutor says. So they're talking about exactly what I was hoping that they would pick up on. The summary pages at the end of the chapter that contain the important theorems and problems, etc., are very helpful. I have this nice, neat little summary. Some of them like to have the problems with solutions. I have problems, and then on the web is a set of detailed solutions. And so I find that helpful. I usually read it before the textbook, and when I read the discrete book, it makes more sense having some background. I think being able to have not so in-depth look at some of the main topics before diving into the textbooks has really allowed for those tough textbook topics to seem as if we've seen them before, because we have, and in turn allows those topics to be more easily understood. All right, what do you find most interesting is one of the questions. The most interesting part, I would say, is how the tutor and the tutee interact. There's someone that likes the story. These sorts of interactions are unexpected just because there are no characters in a math textbook in general. So while this may catch me off guard at times, it is central to the context of the medium. And they do have some interesting interactions. The humanity of the characters and the subtle pieces of humor make the learning process more enjoyable. People like stories. They do. I found the concepts to be the most interesting. Wow, somebody actually likes the content of the course. I could live for a year on that. It's another way to learn content. I haven't read a book like this for a class before, and I think it is interesting how it's the same content, but a little easier to read and understand. Putting a story to some of the things is helpful to get a more realistic way in which some of the topics can be used. Exotic examples in math history, so I've got stuff from introduced magic squares using the Loshu turtle legend from ancient China and Selkies from Ireland and all kinds of stuff. What can be improved? More space for practice or notes. I don't know how I can get more space. I have too little space as it is. One of the former students went and looked at this, and his comment was, no air. It's just too dense. That's true. He said, yeah, this person said I can pick out a sheet of paper, but my goodness. Okay, so here, perhaps having the student Lily struggle with the material more. Sometimes she's too quick in picking up on things, and it leaves me, the reader, in the dust trying to understand how did she make that connection. Leave the book as it is. The plot is slow-moving and not very thrilling. It'd be fine if it was a murder mystery. Next time. 58% of those who are doing the reading say they enjoy the puzzles. That's great. I mean, this has nothing to do with the content of the course or whatever, and so that they're spending time on that. I'm trying to pick fun puzzles, and evidently that's what it is. Okay, so artists is a key issue. When I did this January interim off process, I went to the art teacher Lex and said, know any students who can do this? I said, I've got a student who just went to MCAT this last summer, took a course in drawing manga, and Tristan Hoppy, who has since graduated, did some initial 2 chapters with me as just a prototype. And when I went to start this project, she had her plate full and was not interested in continuing. I then talked to a professional artist and got some pricing, did some character sketches, and at the level that I'm doing now, where I'm doing all the typesetting and stuff like that, it would have still cost me $10,000 to $15,000 out of my pocket. If he would have done all of the typesetting and pictures and everything, it would have been $25,000 or so. For the length, I was shooting for a 225-page book. I've got about 248 something is where it's going to end up at. I added an index in another chapter. I hadn't planned on adding. So that didn't work out. Well, I went to an anime convention last April, and they have this little artist room, and there was one lady who was at MCAD and is doing professional illustrating, and I liked her artwork very, very much. She was saying, yeah, that sounds interesting. I'm really a big fan of education, was a teacher at one time. But she says, I'm in the middle of a big project and I got another one coming up, but send me an email and I'll let you know. I sent her an email and never heard back. So I was in big trouble. But I was teaching a Sunday school class, and one of my fellow teachers kept talking about her daughter, who was one of the high school students there, and how gorgeous her art was. So I kept saying, well, bring some in, and finally they brought some in, and I liked it. So we talked, and so I met this high school senior who's doing my artwork, part-time. I thought, okay, over the summer we're going to work like crazy, and she can do several hours a day. Well, her dad thought tennis was the main priority in her life. And so my part-time work became even more part-time after tennis. It's the first job she's ever had in her life, but it worked out okay. At her best, you can do some here. Jane Austen books came in as an example, and so I had the main tutor in Regency dress. Leonard Euler. She didn't do the map of Königsberg, but it was good old Leonard Euler. Not bad. So that's where we're working with the artist. So I thought I'd end up showing a little bit about how the production process works. I first start writing a page. In fact, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch over to clone mode. There we go. Okay, so I produce a page of text, and it looks like this. Got space to put in the artwork and so forth. And then what I do is I illustrate it so that my artist knows. This is the absolute height of my artistic abilities. In 7th grade, we had art, and I worked so hard at that, and I got a C. Everyone else in the class got A's and B's, except for 2 guys who got D's, and that's because they got sent to the principal at least once a week. Broke my heart. I liked the teacher a lot, but I really, really tried, and I just didn't work. Okay, so I send that off to my artist, and in the summer, a few days later, she comes back with a sheet of paper with the artwork on it. She puts in the little, she found it helpful for her to put in the little lines. It took me a while to get her to not have the artwork touching the lines so that I can erase the lines without erasing any of the artwork. I scan it in at pretty high density and in grayscale, and so the scanner produces a bunch of artifacts that are not real helpful. So the next thing I do after scanning is, when I go down to the bottom, I'm supposed to have some stuff here. I apologize for that. Here we go. This. Okay, so let's see if I can do that to run next. There we go. So I have a little, there's a software product that's a free photo touching, or not photo, but art touching called GIMP. And I've downloaded GIMP, and the first thing I have to do is get rid of all of that cluttering up of the nice white background. And it's got this nice feature that allows me to select some pixels. Right click. This little thing should show those. There we go. Push the right button. And so it's going to replace that gray color with white. Then what I tend to do is grab the toolbar, and I want to erase. So I can set the width of the eraser and get rid of these lines. Zoom in on it, and what I find is that there's some little dots that are just randomly there, picking up from imperfections in the paper or whatever, and I erase those. But then I've got some artifacts from the artist. So I need to go in and erase some of these extra dark pixels. I'm not going to go through all the details, but I'll erase in there, get things to where they need to be, save the picture, and then I go back to the document where I had put in the text, and I'll merge the picture into it. What I find out, this is without some of those erasers in there, what I find out is that some of the people are in the wrong place or they're the wrong size. And so I can go back and do a select and float and move it where they need to be. Or resize. And so eventually, after doing all of that, the final page looks like. So, are there any questions? Yes.
I can share some quick observations maybe. They aren't
Okay.
necessarily questions, but my background is literacy, so.
It'd be better for the film if.
Yeah. Eric had me take a look at the book, kind of just to do a quick review, but just a few additional thoughts after kind of watching the presentation, kind of based on literacy a little bit. But the idea that you've got a preview that's taking place, they're reading your book before they read the textbook, lots and lots of research behind that, because really what it does is it helps the student begin to develop that schema that later on the textbook is really going to be kind of filling out to some degree. So helping them kind of see that big picture before they start, no pun intended, seeing the discrete parts, is a really helpful study strategy, for students. In a sense, it's really starting to build that background, that you're going to be adding to. So I think it's huge benefit from that perspective. Meaningful repetition, and make it stick never uses that, those phrases exactly, but meaningful repetition is a real key part of learning. And for it to be meaningful, it needs to be slightly different. It can't just be a repeat of what's already been said. That's often why reading the textbook 10 times in a row isn't necessarily going to help. But you're saying the same kind of thing, but in a slightly different way. So it is that meaningful repetition, that's helpful. A lot of males in particular aren't big readers of textbooks or of books in general. Particularly not big fans of fiction. And graphic novels, especially in the K-12 market right now, are consumed real heavily by males. And I think it's the kind of look of a comic book, for example, that draws them in. But I think for many students that really don't like to read, a graphic novel is a wonderful way to kind of introduce it for them. Also, generally, the comprehension level of fiction is significantly higher than nonfiction. Nonfiction can be as low as in the 50% range of what students are getting. So for students to have some fiction in there, they can actually understand they're following a simple storyline, can really help to build some confidence, a little bit with the reader as well, too. And I think what's happening with the fiction component that you've introduced along with the nonfiction is the idea of really building some kind of personal connection with the book. And what the research shows on reading, too, is if a reader has a personal connection with the content in some way, they tend to comprehend it better. So you're building that personal connection through humor or whatever. What you're also doing is introducing, in the online world, we talk about instructor presence, but it's certainly true in a face-to-face world, too. But I'm sure they're seeing you through and through as they're reading this. They're hearing Eric Gossett, share these jokes and these strange puzzles and all that kind of thing, too. So that really draws a student in as well. So I think it's a strong part of it, too. And I also think that ultimately, you alluded to this, people are really drawn to people, much more so than content at times. So you're introducing that element in something that's a real content area, or content heavy, discipline. So I think that's a plus too, to kind of draw students in. So kind of a quick ramble on it, but those are things that make sense from a literacy perspective in what you're doing. So I think it's phenomenal, what you're doing, I really do.
Other questions, comments, criticisms? Yes?
Did you consider another art style for it? Because I know some people are rather opposed to the manga art style.
I like the manga art style, but when I was talking with artists, I was saying I'm not, you pick an art style that you're comfortable with. I did have a desire to not be too cartoony. So like a Peanuts or that kind of very cartoony. I wanted something closer to realistic. It doesn't have to be the 60s romance novel kind of realistic, but I wanted closer to more realism. It didn't have to be in the Japanese style, and what I have really isn't, and my artist isn't. But Tristan had a little bit more influence on that originally, and that did shape the designs of the current artist. She looked at Tristan's designs. But, yeah, that's, just didn't want it to be really crude cartoony. There's a book I looked at that's got some really nice stuff in it of a comic guide to statistics produced in America, and the artwork in that is not much, it's probably an order of magnitude better than what I have, but far less than this in terms of its realism. Yes, back first and then.
I'm really interested a bit more in the narrative. I was
Okay.
wondering if you could introduce the characters by their names.
Sure.
And I'd love to know what happens in the story that has the student need a tutor.
Okay, I can probably just show that. I will pull up the book itself, and we'll go to the prologue. So it starts with a math professor calling in the tutor Isolde and saying, I've got a family friend whose 14-year-old daughter is really bright and they would like to do some enrichment. And she likes math. And I'm not sure how to get my taskbar out of the way here. Kill a few things and then I'll make a flute.
Eric, I'll throw in a comment while you're kind of playing a little bit too.
Okay.
There's a common trend in textbooks right now to make them as visually appealing as you possibly can. And often what happens in textbooks now, especially at the K-12 level, is there are a lot of things that actually are really distracting, whatever cognitive energy the student happens to have as they're approaching.
Sidebar, I'm not a fan of sidebars.
Right.
So
So a lot of
even though I
people,
put little things in the page, but
yeah.
yeah.
A lot of people are making a case for keeping it just as simple, straightforward as possible, and at times I would think too that your story could be so complex that the energy of the student is really going in to figure out the story and the dialogue versus really what the intent
Yeah,
of
you
it
can't
is.
have too rich a story, but so the idea is that they've got this girl and they want to supplement and enrich rather than accelerate, which is typically what's done in math. For really gifted math students, we've got the Ump program in the Twin Cities, and the goal there, in my mind, is how quick can we get done with math and move on, which isn't in my thinking. So she gets to meet with, Isolde, with an Irish background, named after like Tristan and Isolde, right? And Lily is Chinese American, and she's just this bright 14-year-old. And they decide to get together, talk a little bit about what on earth is discrete math, and spelling the top one versus the bottom one, I know how to keep my mouth shut. Some of the interactions then, so she'll, so here's the chapters typically look something like this. So here's Lily, better picture. And she's talking about her brother, the computer science major. Have you met him? He took a discrete math class. Nope, I haven't met him. And so he's playing up, and so here we go. Maybe Logan should drop by for one of our tutoring sessions. I bet you would like him. And is she trying to play matchmaker? And that shows up. So next week she brings in a picture of her brother. And so, yeah. And Isolde and the brother do hit it off. Not to Lily fantasizes about them getting married. So one of the little side pictures is Isolde in a wedding dress, and boy, I'd really like you to be my sister-in-law. And Isolde says, I got to student teach and do all this stuff. I can't think about long-term commitments right now. But then surprises Lily later in the book when Lily finds out they've gone to a concert. Her brother Logan and Isolde, and she said, I thought you said you weren't interested. And she makes the, wow. It doesn't mean I have to be a hermit. You know, the fact that I'm not being really serious about romance right now doesn't mean that I can't spend time with Logan. We like each other. So there's a place where Lily has got a piano recital. And she asked Isolde, do you play music? She says, no, but I did step dancing in high school. You know, just stuff like that coming in. Isolde can talk about some of my family history, coming over on the coffin ships and working with a silky puzzle. That answer your question?
Completely.
Okay, good. Kent?
Well, my comment would be, like, this would have been really helpful for me when I was learning math, or even some more abstract science concepts and formulas. Because I found how I learned, I enjoy the stories or even the biographies, the backgrounds of how the theories came to be, or why, what was the story of like how they learned the experiment and then how the math came to be. And so I just say that would have been very helpful. And then secondly, my question would be, how prevalent do you see this kind of thing where math concepts or science concepts are illustrated in this way? Because it sounds like
It's becoming more prevalent.
Because you said that
I've seen a couple of books in the area of statistics. I still like the Manga guide better. And the calculus Manga guide I didn't like. I didn't like the way that they introduced the material, but the database one is great. And the story is about a mythical kingdom, and the little princess is having to run the kingdom because mom and dad have gone off on an extended vacation, and so she's there with her childhood friend, quote, romance interest, who is a commoner. And they find this book, and a little database fairy pops out and starts teaching them how to use a database to help organize the economy of the country. And eventually mom and dad come back and say, this is great, why don't you two get married, we're going on vacation again, you can have the country. So it's got the nicest, most nicely developed story, but it just presents the content really, really well. Devin, did you read that?
Yeah.
And what's your impression?
I thought that it was helpful, did a good job presenting the material and showing what this is actually useful for.
Yes.
I'm curious if you would ever consider taking on the persona of one of the characters during your class time. So Eric Gossett would be
They're mainly
going on.
female, you know.
I know.
Like the math professor does, Isolde goes in and says, I need some help, give me some study hints that you use, and so he sits you down for a part of the story chapter and talks a couple of pages about the story. And as you said, that's me talking. So I guess if anyone's channeling me, it's Professor Douglas. Modeled, I was hoping visually after Frederick Douglass, who I admire enormously, but without the really poofy hair version of Frederick Douglass. So that was my initial instinct, but he models me more than anything, but he and Logan kind of have big parts. It's really the two women. It was a little hard for me to channel it. Yeah, I'd probably get thrown out of the classroom if I tried something like that. Other questions, comments?
Did you review this with your family, or have someone else have eyes on your storyline?
Oh, this whole book.
I'm assuming you have an outline.
My wife has been doing all of the proofreading and giving me suggestions, so she gets it before the students ever do, and finds all my grammar mistakes. You know, my wife, whose English is a second language, knows grammar better than I do. But she also has some ideas, suggestions pedagogically about how to present. This isn't clear, and she's not sure about telling me it's not clear. So yeah, that's been very, very helpful.
Do you find some students say, let's get on with the real stuff, get all this stuff?
Well, they just don't read the book.
Oh, so that's a...
It's a supplement, it's optional. I do zero accountability for this, and so it turns out still over 60% of them are reading it with no
I've sometimes
accountability.
found in terms of class time, that
Oh, class time.
when you deal with history, in my case of physics,
Okay.
quite a few feel I'm really off the subject. Please get on with it. And I occasionally get mad at them. I remember once taking a picture of Einstein I had on the wall off putting it on the floor, and so I'll let you walk over this guy when you leave, because you don't care at all about real people.
Yeah, okay. I haven't gotten comments like that. I think my students are probably more likely hoping that I will get off the subject. Not realizing that the homework doesn't change, even if I never talk about it, they're still doing the same homework. I'm that rigid, so. No, I haven't gotten comments about that specifically. We had an adjunct once who was doing the statistics class and would spend 20 minutes doing a little Bible study or sermon at the beginning of each class. And that was a disastrous semester. And then he disappeared partway through the semester. So we found out they were having group exams and all kinds of horrendous stuff. And then the students were saying, you know, after the fact, yeah, we didn't really like the fact he was using that much class time on something irrelevant, but my students haven't had the nerve to fuss at me yet. Any questions? Okay, well, if you want to take a look at this,